Hi, my name is Alan Hedblum. Welcome to our show, a place to feel like you belong. Today's guest is Bing Goei. During our conversation, you will notice words and phrases appearing on the screen. These expressions we will go over later during a follow-up segment called Would You Say? For more information, you can visit our website at feellikeyouBelong.com. For now, let's welcome today's guest. We welcome Bing Goei to the show. Bing is CEO of Eastern Floral in Grand Rapids, Michigan. His company employs 75 people over 7 locations in West Michigan. Bing, thanks for stopping by.
Thank you, Alan. Thanks for inviting me.
So your family lived in Jakarta, Indonesia.
Yes.
Post-World War II, you were born in Indonesia.
Yes.
Growing up there as a child. And life was good. Your mom was a business person, your dad was an educator, and then all of a sudden something happened in 1954 and your family gave that all up. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, as you may know, Indonesia was a Dutch colony, and when they gained their independence, they elected the first president, President Sukarno. And when he took over as president, his influence was great. I mean, his political persuasion was influenced greatly by Russia, Nikita Khrushchev, and they began to impose certain philosophies that my father was very fearful of. He was being told what to teach by the government, and he saw that the opportunities for his children was diminished, and therefore he and my mom decided to leave and flee Indonesia, with the intent of going and relocating to Suriname, which was a Dutch colony also in South America. But in order for us to get to Suriname, we had to go to the Netherlands and get on a boat in the Netherlands to go to Suriname. But while we were waiting for a boat in the Netherlands, my father was offered a teaching position in the Netherlands, which he accepted. And so I lived in the Netherlands also for about 5.5 years.
So you go from living life in Jakarta, speaking Indonesian,
right,
growing up in that culture, ethnically Chinese, speaking Indonesian,
right,
but learned a little bit of Dutch because of the Dutch influence.
Right, a lot of Dutch culture. And
then transported to the Netherlands. And so here's this Asian kid living in the Netherlands, and you went to school there for how long?
Probably about 5.5 years, yeah. And I enjoyed my childhood years there as well. As children we're so resilient. We can go any place and we can make friends and we can have a good time, and so it was an enjoyable experience as well.
Did you sense the trauma of that dispossession though? Because you told me that your family had to pack up basically suitcases. You had to leave all of your other possessions behind. Did that register with you?
No, as a child, it didn't register with me. Okay. I mean, life was good. My parents always made sure that we were taken care of. There was nothing there that says, "Boy, we are really struggling. We're really in trouble," or any of those kinds of feelings. Our parents were great, and they made sure that our transition was done in a very positive way. Mm-hmm. So.
But then you didn't stay in the Netherlands. You came to the United States.
Yeah, it was interesting because what was happening was there was not just our family, but it was also many, many thousands of families who fled Indonesia as well, who began to see the negative impact that communism had on their own lives. And so they also fled Indonesia and also went to the Netherlands because that was a natural attraction for them. They were familiar with the Dutch culture because it was a Dutch colony. Indonesia was a Dutch colony. And so it was probably in the 1950s, or late 50s, in which Queen Juliana asked President Eisenhower to open up special immigration quotas for Indonesian political refugees. And President Eisenhower and Congress approved those immigration quotas, and so with the stipulation that all Indonesian political refugees immigrating to the United States had to have a sponsor who were responsible for their well-being, because they were not allowed to be dependent upon government assistance when they arrived in the United States. And our family was sponsored by Fuller Avenue Christian Reformed Church.
Lo and behold, West Michigan full of Dutch people.
Yes.
And
yes.
so you have a kind of in there, even though you don't look Dutch.
Yeah. But what was interesting about that, and I think you will probably show the front page of the Grand Rapids Press of January 9, 1960, in which our family picture was taken and placed on the front page of the Grand Rapids Press. And what was interesting is that the deacons of Fuller Avenue Christian Reformed Church had Dutch names, and they came and met us, and here was this Chinese family coming off the train, speaking Dutch to them, and they did not know how to speak Dutch. So that was my first cross-cultural experience in Grand Rapids. So it was fun, but they were very, the people of the church were very generous. One thing that I will always remember, as we arrived to the home that they rented for us on Logan Street, right on the corner, basically in the corner of Logan and Fuller. And I remember seeing my mom cry, because, we've never seen a house this large. And then when we opened the refrigerator, it was filled with food. I mean, it was just an amazing emotional experience for my parents to see.
Kind of an unspoken sign that said, "You're welcome here."
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And because I think of this loyalty, you have stuck with the Christian Reformed Church all these years, even though you are definitely a racial minority.
Yes.
in that church,
Yes.
in that organization. But your family became very involved with the church over the years. But you had a very poignant story that we were talking about earlier. As you got more involved with the church, you were invited to join a commission on race for, I believe, the national church.
Yes, I was appointed by our synod to be the executive director for the Ministry on Racial Reconciliation.
And when you told your dad this?
Yeah, and when my dad was there at the synodical hearings and the appointment, he came to me afterwards with tears in his eyes and saying how proud he was of my being able to do this. And I said to him, "Why are you crying?" Because most Asian men in that generation don't have those emotional
Very
expressions,
stoic.
right? And then he told me his story of how he had to go through some difficult times because he was an educator all his life. When he came to the United States, they wouldn't acknowledge any of his credits or any of his degrees or anything, and he wanted to go back to teaching. He was a janitor when he first came, and then he wanted to go back to teaching. He was told he had to go back to college for at least a year and then retake the teacher's test or exam. And then when he accomplished all those things, then he was given the same status as a four-year college graduate. Now he had probably over 20 years of experience already at that time.
So he jumped through all the hoops. He had
Yes.
all this previous experience, lots of knowledge, and yet and jumped through the hoops.
Right.
And then they said, "Okay, you're going to start out at the bottom."
At the bottom.
But he did that because he was committed to
He
making
did
his life work.
Absolutely, and because he felt that was the system, until the same school system hired another immigrant who came from Hungary, and he was given all his credentials, all his levels of experience, and also the amount of dollars that came with it. And my dad felt that was unfair, and so he asked for some kind of answers. And no one wanted to give him any answers here in Grand Rapids. He was basically told, "Don't create waves, just be happy you have a job." All those kinds of cliches that we hear oftentimes. But except for two individuals, two of his friends who said, "No, this is wrong," went to then Representative Gerald Ford's office in Washington, D.C., told Representative Ford the story. Representative Ford said, "No, this is wrong," and stepped in and required Michigan State University, I believe it was, to give my dad an equivalency test of a master's degree, which he passed, and then Representative Ford required the school system to give him the pay that's commensurate with the master's degree level. And so, my dad, when I asked my dad, "Why didn't you tell us that this was happening to you?" Because this happened to him in the 60s. And he said, "No, I didn't want any of your children to believe that you couldn't accomplish whatever you wanted to do in this great country." So at that point, I said to him, as long as I live, I will always try to find a way to support those who have been unjustly treated. Because my dad was my hero. My dad was a man of great integrity, and you know what? When I saw the pain in his eyes, I said, "There's no other human being. No human being should have to experience that type of, situation in his or her life."
Humiliation.
It was horrible. It was horrible. So and that's why I think that right now I've been, actively involved in ensuring that we address any injustice, whether it's racial injustice, gender injustice, whatever injustice that we see in the world, that that I will try to do what I can to challenge that.
And you've really been active, and your record speaks for itself in terms of your community involvement. You have worked with the Institutes for Healing Racism. You're active with the West Michigan Asian American Association, APAC, Partners for a Racism-Free Community, this CRC, Commission on Race. And so that really supports that mission. You have turned now, your company has purchased an old furniture factory, remodeled it, and so you use it as maybe the headquarters for your business.
Right.
So there's floral industry going on in one corner, but it's a huge center for a lot of events.
Right.
But you've also done some incubation programs for new startup businesses,
right.
And you're about to launch a new initiative. Can you tell us more about that?
Well, one of the things that I think is important for our economy in West Michigan is the recognition that our world is shrinking, and the term global economy is becoming part of our of our life, and so in order for us to be able to create a sustainable economy, we must address the question: why is it that we can't recruit and retain international minority talents in Grand Rapids and West Michigan? And so I started a program called the International Center for Entrepreneurial Excellence. We focus on helping minority and women entrepreneurs to encourage them to stay in Grand Rapids and in West Michigan, to establish their businesses, to establish their professional careers. Because you see, we need their talents to continue to be sustained, to sustain our businesses here. And now what we will be unveiling in the next couple of weeks is an expanded program of that. The international community is also growing in Grand Rapids. And what we need to begin to realize is that whenever we recruit someone to work, say, at Van Allen Institute or at the Michigan Medical School or at Steelcase or Herman Miller, they come with family, they come with other people. And it is not always the talent that is going to feel isolated, it is those who come with them that will feel isolated and will place the pressure on that person to leave because they don't want to stay here.
The family's not happy, the employees.
That's right. So we are going to actually focus on the development of what I call the International Pavilion, where the international community, international students, those who are feeling somewhat isolated, can come to this place and have questions answered, can have a social interaction with people who are like them as well. And I think what we want to do is create a welcoming community. One of the things that I have learned from many studies that have been done is that the number one strategy for helping us shift from a manufacturer-based economy to a knowledge-based economy is not what we're always talking about, cutting taxes. The number one strategy that this research company think tank has found out is the number one strategy is creating a culture aligned with the flat world. And it consists of three things. One, we must have the best institutions of higher learning. Two, we must create a culture that embraces entrepreneurship. And three, we must create a welcoming community where discrimination and segregation is not tolerated. Interesting, isn't it? But we always talk about the first two, but we never talk about the third one. And I think it's time for us to address the third one, because that is a critical piece of having us and making us a successful and welcoming community here in West Michigan.
That's awesome. We look forward to that unveiling very soon. To close with, your mom lives with you now, your dad has passed. Mm-hmm. If your dad were here today looking at his son and what he has committed himself to and what the plans are for this next launch of this international center, what would he say?
Oh boy. Well, what I hope he would say is that, I'm appreciative of your willingness to listen to your elders and to also be willing to listen to your God. Because both my mom and my dad are both very strong faith Christian individuals, and I think that's what would make him the proudest.
Okay. Thanks so much for joining us today, Bing.
Thank you for the invitation.
And thank you for joining us on Feel Like You Belong. During this section, we are going to go over some of the slang, some of the idioms, some of the cultural expressions that you saw highlighted during our conversation with Bing Goei. During the conversation, I said, "Lo and behold, you ended up in West Michigan." Now, this is an old-fashioned expression. It means something surprising or something amazing happened. And in fact, it was surprising that this Chinese family, having lived in Indonesia and then in the Netherlands, had suddenly come to live in very non-diverse West Michigan. Bing said that his dad jumped through all the hoops. His father thought he had done all this retraining that he was made to do was a normal part of the U.S. educational system. Now, in the circus, animals are trained to perform tricks, including jumping through hoops, sometimes ones that are lit on fire. The tricks aren't logical, but the animals have to do what the circus master tells them to do. Other difficult vocabulary will be explained on the Feel Like You Belong website for this episode with Bing Goei. Earlier this year, the Associated Press announced it will no longer recommend that journalists use the term illegal immigrant when referring to immigrants in the U.S. without legal permission. Instead of using illegal to describe a person, it is telling users that illegal should describe only an action, such as living in or immigrating to a country illegally. The New York Times recently announced it will also be revising its usage of the term illegal immigrant. For further details on this story, visit our website at feellikeyouBelong.com. So if you are a non-native speaker of English, you've had the experience of standing around with a group of Americans, and all of a sudden everyone bursts out laughing, and you're left there wondering, what's so funny? If that experience has happened to you, you know that humor can be one of the last things that you get when learning English as a second language. You're good at work, you know the vocabulary, the nuance of various professional applications of language, but humor is just lagging behind. And humor is actually very complex because it's interwoven with not only our language, our history, our culture, and so it's really very deep. What we want to attempt in this segment is to show you little glimpses of typical American humor so that down the road, after you've paid attention for a while, you'll start to laugh with that group of Americans and you can be on the inside looking out. So what I'd like to do today with you is to share a joke that my grandfather told me. My grandfather is an immigrant from Sweden, so he spoke English as a second language till his final days, spoke English with a heavy Swedish accent. And this joke is representative of something that I will call ethnic humor. And there will be a deeper explanation on our website talking about ethnic humor. You want to be very careful because basically, if you are not from that ethnic group, you should avoid ethnic humor because the majority of ethnic jokes tend to play upon stereotypes and the aspects of that group which show people in a very unflattering sort of way. So here's the joke from my grandfather. Ole was walking down the road and he saw his friend Sven. And Sven had a fishing pole over his shoulder and he had a fishing creel over the other shoulder. And as Ole walked down the road, he said, "Hey there, Sven, what you been doing?" And Sven said, "Well, Ole, you dumb Swede, what you think I've been doing? I've been fishing." He says, "Well, Sven," he said, how many fish you got in the creel there? And Sven said, well, Ole, if you can guess how many fish I got in the creel there, I give you both of them. And Ole, he guesses 3. And Sven says, well, that's not bad, you only missed by 2.